March 12, 1945, 03:47 hours, Luzon, Philippines. The morning mist clung to the razor wire that stretched endlessly across the Shimbu Defense Line, a fortified barrier that Japanese engineers believed would hold back any American assault for months. Behind those interlaced steel coils, Colonel Masataka Yamashita's 30,000 defenders waited in carefully prepared positions, confident that their wire obstacles would channel any attack into predetermined killing zones where machine guns and mortars could deliver devastating crossfire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they could not have anticipated was the long, snake-like device that American engineers were quietly positioning in the pre-dawn darkness. The M1A1 Bangalore torpedo, 50 pounds of Composition B explosive packed into steel tubing, represented a solution to defensive problems the Japanese military doctrine had never seriously considered. In the next few hours, the thunderous detonations would shatter more than steel wire. They would destroy fundamental assumptions about defensive warfare that had guided Japanese strategy throughout the Pacific. The soldiers of the 158th Regimental Combat Team, nicknamed the Bushmasters, carried with them a weapon system so specialized that most infantry had never seen one in training. Yet this device, originally developed for cutting through the wire entanglements of World War I, would prove devastatingly effective against the most sophisticated defensive barriers Japanese engineers had ever constructed. The mathematics of destruction were deceptively simple. Each Bangalore torpedo section contained 27 pounds of high explosive distributed along a 5-foot steel tube. When properly assembled and detonated, a single torpedo could clear a gap 40 feet wide through the most densely packed wire obstacles. The explosive force would not merely cut individual strands, it would obliterate entire sections of defensive barriers, creating corridors through which American infantry could advance in formation rather than crawling through gaps one soldier at a time. The Imperial Japanese Army had invested enormous resources in perfecting their wire obstacles throughout 1944 and early 1945. Engineering manuals captured after the war revealed the sophisticated thinking behind these defenses. Japanese engineers had studied American assault tactics from previous Pacific operations, noting the effectiveness of Bangalore torpedoes against simple wire barriers. Their response had been to create defensive systems specifically designed to counter such devices. The Shimbu line incorporated multiple rows of wire obstacles separated by carefully calculated distances. Japanese engineers believed that Bangalore torpedoes, with their limited length, could not breach multiple barrier lines simultaneously. They had positioned wire rows at intervals that would require separate demolition efforts for each obstacle, giving defenders time to bring concentrated fire against exposed engineers. This calculation proved to be fatally flawed. American engineers had developed techniques for linking multiple Bangalore sections together, creating extended demolition charges that could breach defensive zones nearly 200 feet deep. The Japanese had prepared for attacks against individual wire lines. They had not anticipated simultaneous destruction of their entire defensive perimeter. Power relative to weight. The threading system allowed sections to be screwed together rapidly, even under fire. Nose pieces directed the explosive force downward and outward, maximizing the destruction of ground-level obstacles while minimizing the vertical blast that might endanger friendly troops. The training manual for the M1A1, Technical Manual 9/1985, emphasized the weapon's versatility. While originally designed for wire cutting, field testing had demonstrated effectiveness against concrete obstacles, wooden barriers, and even light fortifications. The manual included detailed calculations for determining the number of sections required to breach obstacles of varying thickness and construction. Most critically for Pacific operations, the Bangalore torpedo proved effective against the complex wire obstacles the Japanese engineers favored. Unlike the simple barbed wire of World War I, Japanese defensive barriers incorporated multiple types of steel wire woven into intricate patterns. These obstacles were designed to entangle attackers while providing minimal target for conventional explosive devices. The explosive power of the Bangalore torpedo rendered such complexity irrelevant. The detonation created a shockwave that shattered steel wire regardless of its configuration. The blast effect extended beyond the immediate explosive zone, weakening wire structures that appeared intact but would collapse under the weight of advancing soldiers. Japanese defensive doctrine in the Philippines represented the culmination of 4 years of learning from American assaults across the Pacific. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, commanding the 14th Area Army, had studied every major amphibious operation from Guadalcanal through Leyte. His conclusions, documented in captured intelligence reports, reflected sophisticated understanding of American tactical capabilities. Yamashita recognized that Japanese forces could not match American firepower in open battle. His strategy focused on defensive attrition, forcing American troops to assault prepared positions while minimizing Japanese exposure to superior American artillery and air power. The wire obstacles were integral to this approach, designed to slow American advances while exposing attacking troops to concentrated defensive fire. The Shimbu Line represented Yamashita's most ambitious defensive project. Extending across the mountainous terrain east of Manila, the fortified zone incorporated natural obstacles enhanced by extensive engineering works. Japanese troops had spent months constructing wire barriers that followed the contours of ridge lines and valleys, creating a defensive maze that seemed impenetrable to conventional assault. Intelligence reports from the period revealed Japanese confidence in these defenses. Captured documents include detailed calculations showing that American forces would require weeks to breach the wire obstacles using conventional methods. Japanese planners estimated that such prolonged assault operations would result in casualties exceeding American tolerance, potentially forcing a negotiated settlement. These calculations failed to account for the devastating effectiveness of properly employed Bangalore torpedoes. The weapon system that Japanese intelligence had dismissed as suitable only for simple wire cutting would prove capable of reducing the most sophisticated defensive barriers to twisted scrap metal in seconds. The first extensive American use of Bangalore torpedoes against Japanese positions had occurred during the Hollandia operation in April 1944. The 41st Infantry Division encountered Japanese wire obstacles protecting the airfield complex that represented the operation's primary objective. Conventional wire-cutting techniques proved inadequate against the multi-layered defensive barriers that Japanese engineers had constructed around critical installations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Operation represented his first combat employment of the weapon. The target was a wire barrier complex, approximately 100 feet deep, incorporating multiple rows of concertina wire interwoven with steel cables and razor wire. Morrison's team assembled a Bangalore charge using 8 sections, creating a demolition device 40 feet long containing over 200 pounds of Composition B explosive. The assembly process required 15 minutes under enemy observation, with Japanese snipers maintaining sporadic fire throughout the operation. Morrison later reported that the psychological pressure of working with high explosives while under fire represented the most challenging aspect of the mission. The detonation exceeded all expectations. The explosive force not only cleared the intended gap, but destroyed wire obstacles across a front exceeding 200 feet. The blast effect created a corridor through which an entire infantry company could advance in formation. More importantly, the psychological impact on Japanese defenders was profound. Many abandoned their positions immediately following the explosion. The success at Hollandia led to increased production and distribution of Bangalore torpedoes throughout American forces in the Pacific. Engineering units received additional training, while infantry companies were equipped with the weapons for independent operation. The War Department issued new tactical manuals emphasizing the integration of Bangalore torpedoes into assault planning. By late 1944, American forces had developed sophisticated techniques for employing Bangalore torpedoes against Japanese defensive systems. These methods represented tactical innovation driven by combat experience rather than theoretical planning. Soldiers and engineers who had faced Japanese wire obstacles contributed practical knowledge that enhanced official doctrine. The technique known as daisy chaining involved linking multiple Bangalore sections to create demolition charges of extraordinary length. The record appears to have been set during the Mandoro operation, where engineers assembled a Bangalore charge over 300 feet long to breach a defensive complex protecting a Japanese radar installation. The resulting explosion was reportedly visible from ships offshore and created a gap through which an entire battalion could advance simultaneously. Sequential detonation represented another innovation developed in the field. Rather than attempting to breach all defensive obstacles simultaneously, engineers would detonate Bangalore charges in carefully timed sequence. The initial explosion would destroy the forward wire barriers while creating debris that would partially fill anti-tank ditches. Subsequent detonations would clear remaining obstacles, while the debris served as improvised bridges for advancing armor. The integration of Bangalore torpedoes with other assault techniques created combined arms tactics that proved devastatingly effective against Japanese defensive positions. The standard procedure involved preliminary artillery bombardment to suppress defensive fire, followed by Bangalore detonation to clear obstacles, with infantry assault commencing immediately while Japanese defenders remained stunned by the explosive effects. Smokescreens proved essential for concealing Bangalore assembly operations. American forces developed techniques using white phosphorus shells to create obscuring smoke while simultaneously marking targets for the demolition teams. The phosphorus would burn for several minutes, providing concealment during the critical assembly phase whilst indicating wind direction for optimal charge placement. The timing of Bangalore employment became increasingly sophisticated as American forces gained experience. Rather than detonating charges immediately upon assembly, engineers learned to coordinate with supporting fires to maximize psychological impact. The preferred technique involved completing charge assembly during artillery bombardment, then detonating charges at increasingly long ranges as forces advanced for creating breaches. Bangalore as the artillery shifted to targets deeper in the defensive zone. This coordination ensured that Japanese defenders had no respite from explosive effects. As the artillery barrage lifted, the Bangalore detonation would create a second shockwave, followed immediately by the advancing infantry assault. Defenders who had survived the artillery bombardment found themselves facing a new explosive crisis with no time to reorganize their defense. The sound signature of Bangalore detonation became a psychological weapon in itself. Veterans from both sides reported that the distinctive crack of Composition B explosive was immediately recognizable and created panic among Japanese defenders. Unlike artillery explosions, which Japanese troops had learned to endure, the Bangalore detonation signaled immediate infantry assault, creating psychological pressure that often proved more effective than the physical destruction. Japanese forces attempted various countermeasures against Bangalore torpedo attacks throughout 1944 and early 1945. These efforts, documented in captured technical manuals and post-war interrogation reports, reveal both the perceived threat and the difficulty of developing effective responses. The most direct approach involved targeting the demolition teams during the assembly phase. Japanese defenders were instructed to concentrate fire on any soldiers observed working with long metallic objects, reasoning that destroying the Bangalore before detonation would preserve the defensive obstacles. This tactic proved only marginally effective due to American smoke screening techniques and the speed with which experienced teams could assemble charges. Alternative defensive measures included modifying wire obstacle construction to incorporate anti-demolition features. Some Japanese positions used wooden posts treated with gasoline-soaked materials, creating obstacles that would burn fiercely when subjected to explosive attack. The theory was that the resulting fires would prevent infantry from exploiting gaps created by Bangalore detonation. These fire obstacles proved counterproductive. The Bangalore explosive force was sufficient to scatter burning materials, often igniting vegetation that provided additional concealment for American forces. In several documented cases, Japanese positions set themselves ablaze, attempting to counter Bangalore attacks, forcing defenders to abandon positions due to smoke and flames. More sophisticated countermeasures involved constructing dummy wire obstacles designed to absorb Bangalore attacks while preserving the actual defensive barriers. Japanese engineers would create obvious wire obstacles forward of their actual defensive positions, hoping to trick American forces into wasting Bangalore torpedoes against insignificant targets. This deception proved ineffective against experienced American units. By 1945, reconnaissance techniques had evolved to identify genuine defensive obstacles through careful observation and intelligence analysis. American forces would often employ Bangalore torpedoes against dummy obstacles while simultaneously assaulting the actual defensive positions through alternative routes, negating the intended deception. The most ambitious Japanese countermeasure involved constructing defensive positions specifically designed to channel Bangalore attacks into predetermined kill zones. These installations incorporated wire obstacles arranged to funnel demolition teams toward positions where concentrated fire could be brought to bear. Hidden machine gun positions would wait until Bangalore assembly commenced before opening fire. The effectiveness of such measures depended entirely on American forces following predictable attack patterns. As Bangalore employment became more sophisticated, American commanders developed techniques for avoiding obvious approach routes and conducting reconnaissance to identify concealed defensive positions. The integration of Bangalore attacks with diversionary assaults further complicated Japanese defensive planning.
The industrial production of Bangalore torpedoes reflected American manufacturing capabilities that Japanese forces could not match. According to War Department procurement records, over 500,000 Bangalore sections were manufactured between 1943 and 1945, representing an investment in specialized demolition equipment that dwarfed Japanese engineering capabilities. The manufacturing process involved multiple contractors producing standardized components that could be assembled in the field. This approach contrasted sharply with Japanese manufacturing, which relied on local production of improvised explosive devices using whatever materials were available. The quality control standards for American Bangalore production ensured reliable performance under combat conditions, while Japanese improvised devices frequently failed to detonate or produced insufficient explosive effect. The logistical system for Bangalore distribution demonstrated American organizational superiority. The weapons were stockpiled at forward supply bases and distributed to combat units based on anticipated requirements. Engineering companies typically received Bangalore torpedoes in quantities sufficient for multiple assault operations, while infantry units received smaller allocations for independent missions. This abundance of specialized demolition equipment allowed American forces to employ Bangalore torpedoes liberally without concern for conservation. Units could afford to use excessive charges to ensure complete obstacle destruction, while Japanese forces hoarded their limited explosive supplies for critical situations. The psychological effect of this material superiority extended beyond the immediate tactical benefits. The training programs for Bangalore employment reflected American systematic approaches to military education. Engineer schools developed comprehensive courses covering assembly techniques, charge calculation, safety procedures, and tactical integration. The curriculum included extensive practical exercises using live explosives, ensuring that graduates possessed confidence and competence in handling the weapons under stress. Infantry units received abbreviated Bangalore training as part of their assault preparation. This training emphasized rapid assembly techniques and basic safety procedures, enabling infantry squads to employ the weapons independently when engineer support was unavailable. The cross-training approach ensured that Bangalore capability was distributed throughout American forces rather than concentrated in specialist units. Japanese forces lacked equivalent training programs for specialized demolition equipment. Their engineering education focused on construction and fortification rather than obstacle reduction. This training disparity became apparent during combat operations, where American demolition techniques consistently exceeded Japanese expectations. The employment of Bangalore torpedoes during the Luzon campaign demonstrated the full evolution of American demolition tactics. By March 1945, the techniques developed through 18 months of Pacific combat had matured into systematic procedures that could reduce even the most sophisticated Japanese defensive positions. The Shimbu Line represented the ultimate test of these capabilities. The defensive complex that Colonel Yamashita's engineers had constructed across the mountainous terrain east of Manila incorporated every lesson Japanese forces had learned from previous American assaults. The wire obstacles were more extensive and sophisticated than any previously encountered, while the defensive positions were designed to maximize the effectiveness of limited Japanese manpower and firepower. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese forces had prepared defensive positions in depth, with multiple fallback lines connected by communication trenches and supply tunnels. The wire obstacles protected not only the forward defensive positions, but also the routes between positions, creating a defensive maze that seemed impossible to breach.
Impervious to conventional assault. American planning for the assault incorporated Bangalore torpedoes as primary weapons rather than specialized tools. The attack plan called for simultaneous Bangalore attacks against multiple sections of the defensive line, creating numerous breach points that would overwhelm Japanese defensive fires. This approach represented a fundamental shift from earlier operations, where Bangalore torpedoes had been employed to create single penetration points. The scale of the planned operation required unprecedented Bangalore production and distribution. Supply officers calculated requirements based on the estimated extent of Japanese wire obstacles, then doubled the quantities to ensure adequate reserves. The resulting stockpile included over 5,000 Bangalore sections, sufficient to breach defensive positions extending across miles of mountainous terrain. The complexity of the assault plan necessitated extensive rehearsal and coordination. Engineer units practiced assembly techniques until they could complete Bangalore charges in darkness using only tactile reference. Infantry companies rehearsed assault procedures designed to exploit gaps immediately following detonation, minimizing the time available for Japanese forces to reorganize their defense. Artillery support planning incorporated Bangalore employment into the overall fire plan. Rather than viewing demolition and artillery as separate activities, planners developed integrated schedules that maximized the cumulative psychological and physical effects. The artillery would suppress Japanese defensive fires during Bangalore assembly, then shift to deeper targets as the demolition charges detonated. The communication requirements for coordinating such complex operations pushed American radio capabilities to their limits. Each demolition team required communication with supporting artillery, while assault companies needed coordination with multiple demolition efforts. The radio traffic management became a specialized skill that required dedicated personnel and sophisticated scheduling. The medical planning for the operation recognized that Bangalore employment created unique casualty risks. The explosive force could injure friendly personnel if safety distances were not maintained, while the rapid infantry assault following detonation increased the likelihood of casualties from Japanese defensive fires. Medical units positioned themselves to provide immediate treatment for both explosive injuries and conventional combat wounds. The psychological preparation of assault troops included briefings on the expected effects of Bangalore detonation. Many soldiers had never experienced the explosive force of properly employed Bangalore torpedoes, and commanders recognized that the shock of friendly explosives might affect unit cohesion. Training exercises included exposure to Bangalore detonations to familiarize troops with the visual and auditory effects. The final preparations included detailed weather analysis to optimize Bangalore employment. Wind conditions affected smoke screening effectiveness, while humidity influenced explosive performance. The assault was scheduled to coincide with atmospheric conditions that would maximize the effectiveness of American demolition techniques while minimizing visibility for Japanese defensive fires. As the American forces prepared for their assault on the Shimbu line, Japanese defenders made final adjustments to positions they believed were impregnable. The wire obstacles that stretched across the mountainous terrain represented months of back-breaking labor, while the defensive positions incorporated every innovation Japanese military engineers had developed. In the pre-dawn hours of March 12, 1945, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would demonstrate whether Japanese defensive engineering could withstand American demolition capabilities.
The stage was set for a battle that would prove whether the sophisticated wire obstacles of the Shimbu Line could fulfill their promise of channeling American attacks into killing zones, or whether the thunder of Bangalore torpedoes would once again shatter Japanese defensive assumptions and open corridors for American victory. The explosion came at exactly 0347 hours, a thunderous crack that split the morning silence and sent shockwaves rippling across the Shimbu Line. Staff Sergeant Robert Chan of the 158th Combat Engineers had assembled his Bangalore charge with mechanical precision, linking 12 sections into a 60-foot demolition snake that contained over 300 pounds of Composition B explosive. The detonation vaporized 200 feet of Japanese wire obstacles in an instant, creating a corridor wide enough for an entire rifle company to advance in formation. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders exceeded even the physical destruction. Private First Class Hiroshi Tanaka of the 23rd Independent Infantry Battalion later described the moment in captured diary entries found after the battle. "The explosion," he wrote, "sounded like the earth itself splitting apart, followed by a rain of twisted metal and concrete fragments that fell like deadly snow across the defensive positions. The carefully constructed wire maze that had taken his unit 3 months to complete simply vanished in a wall of orange flame and black smoke." Colonel Yamashita's radio operators immediately reported the breach, but their messages conveyed confusion rather than tactical assessment. The defensive plan had anticipated individual gaps that could be sealed by concentrated machine gun fire. Instead, the Bangalore detonation had created a highway through the heart of Japanese defenses, obliterating not just wire obstacles, but also the communication trenches and supply routes that connected defensive positions. The American infantry assault commenced within 30 seconds of the explosion. Captain James Rodriguez of Fox Company, 158th Infantry, had positioned his men just beyond the Bangalore blast radius, close enough to advance immediately, but far enough to avoid friendly fire casualties. His soldiers moved through the gap in squad rushes, establishing fire positions on the far side of the wire complex before Japanese defenders could reorganize their response. The speed of the American advance caught Japanese forces completely unprepared. The defensive plan assumed that obstacle reduction would require extended periods of vulnerability, during which American engineers would be exposed to defensive fire. The Bangalore system eliminated this vulnerability, allowing assault troops to exploit breaches before defenders could react effectively. Within 10 minutes of the initial explosion, American forces had penetrated 300 yards into the Japanese defensive zone. The success of the initial Bangalore assault triggered a chain reaction across the entire Shimbu Line. As Japanese commanders attempted to respond to the Fox Company breakthrough, additional Bangalore detonations erupted at locations selected to maximize defensive confusion. Each explosion created new penetration points that drew Japanese reserves away from the original breach, fragmenting the defensive response and preventing coordinated counterattack. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Petrasky, commanding the 158th Regimental Combat Team, had orchestrated the multiple Bangalore attacks to exploit Japanese defensive doctrine. Intelligence analysis had identified the Japanese tendency to reinforce threatened sectors by stripping troops from adjacent positions. The simultaneous detonations across a 5-mile front prevented such reinforcement, leaving each defensive sector to fight in isolation against superior American forces. The tactical innovation extended beyond simple obstacle breaching. American engineers had developed techniques for using Bangalore detonations to create instant artillery observation posts. The explosive force would clear vegetation and debris, providing forward observers with unobstructed views of Japanese positions. Artillery fire could then be adjusted using these observation points, bringing accurate supporting fire within minutes of the initial assault. The integration of artillery, engineering, and infantry tactics acted as a force multiplier, allowing U.S. forces to break through the heavily fortified Shimbu Line.
Of Bangalore attacks with armor support represented another tactical evolution that Japanese defenders had not anticipated. Sherman tanks of the 754th Tank Battalion followed immediately behind the infantry assault, using the gaps created by Bangalore detonations to penetrate deeply into Japanese defensive positions. The combination of rapid obstacle reduction and immediate armor exploitation prevented Japanese forces from establishing new defensive lines. Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized defense in depth, with multiple fallback positions prepared to contain penetrations of the forward defensive line. The Bangalore system negated this approach by creating simultaneous breaches at multiple points, overwhelming the ability of Japanese reserves to contain all penetrations. The defenders found themselves fighting separate battles at each breach point, rather than conducting coordinated defensive operations. The explosive effects of Bangalore detonations created additional advantages beyond obstacle clearance. The blast waves collapsed communication trenches and buried telephone lines, severing connections between Japanese defensive positions. Command and control broke down as unit commanders lost contact with higher headquarters and adjacent units, preventing the coordinated response the Japanese defensive doctrine required. The debris created by Bangalore explosions provided immediate cover for advancing American troops. Twisted wire and concrete fragments formed natural obstacles that channeled Japanese defensive fire away from assault routes. American forces learned to exploit these debris fields, using the destruction created by their own weapons as protective terrain during the advance. The sound signatures of Bangalore detonations became a form of psychological warfare. Japanese defenders reported that the distinctive crack of Composition B explosive created immediate panic, even among veterans who had survived months of artillery bombardment. The sound indicated that American infantry would appear within seconds, creating psychological pressure that often proved more effective than the physical destruction. The medical effects of Bangalore employment extended beyond conventional explosive injuries. Japanese survivors described a unique form of trauma created by the sudden destruction of defensive positions that had seemed impregnable. The psychological impact of watching months of construction work disappear in seconds created a sense of helplessness that undermined defensive morale throughout the Shimbu line. American forces developed specialized first aid techniques for treating injuries caused by Bangalore fragments. The explosive force created unique wound patterns involving both blast effects and penetrating injuries from wire fragments. Medical corpsmen received training in treating these combination injuries, ensuring that assault troops received appropriate care during the rapid advance following Bangalore employment. A logistical system supporting Bangalore operations evolved to meet the unprecedented demands of sustained defensive operations. Supply convoys included specialized Bangalore sections manufactured to precise specifications, while ammunition dumps maintained ready stocks of assembled charges. The industrial capacity required to sustain such operations demonstrated American material superiority that Japanese forces could not match. Quality control in Bangalore manufacturing ensured consistent performance under combat conditions. Each explosive section underwent rigorous testing to verify detonation reliability, while assembly components were engineered to precise tolerances that guaranteed proper fit during rapid field assembly. This industrial precision contrasted sharply with Japanese improvised demolition devices that frequently failed to detonate or produced insufficient explosive effect. The training evolution for Bangalore employment reflected lessons learned through extensive combat experience. Engineer schools modified their curricula to incorporate specific instruction on Bangalore deployment in various tactical situations, emphasizing rapid assembly and emplacement.
Emphasize rapid assembly techniques developed in the field, while infantry training incorporated Bangalore handling as a basic skill rather than specialized knowledge. The democratization of demolition capabilities ensured that Bangalore effectiveness was not dependent on specialist availability. Cross-training between engineer and infantry units created tactical flexibility that Japanese commanders found impossible to predict. Infantry squads could employ Bangalore torpedoes independently when engineer support was unavailable, while engineer units could provide rifle security during demolition operations. This tactical integration eliminated the predictability that Japanese countermeasures required to be effective. The mathematical precision of Bangalore employment became a science rather than an art. Combat experience provided data for calculating explosive requirements based on obstacle characteristics, while timing studies determined optimal coordination with supporting fires. These calculations were reduced to field-expedient tables that allowed rapid tactical planning without extensive computation.
The employment of Bangalore torpedoes during the Baguio operation in April 1945 demonstrated the full maturation of American demolition tactics. General Yamashita had concentrated his remaining forces in the mountain stronghold, constructing defensive positions that incorporated every lesson learned from previous American assaults. The wire obstacles protecting Baguio were the most sophisticated defensive barriers Japanese engineers had ever constructed. The defensive complex incorporated multiple obstacle zones separated by carefully calculated distances designed to defeat extended Bangalore charges. Japanese engineers had studied American demolition techniques and believed they had developed countermeasures that would force American forces to conduct separate breaching operations against each obstacle zone, providing time for defensive fire to inflict prohibitive casualties. American planning for the Baguio operation incorporated Bangalore torpedoes as the primary breach capability, but the techniques employed represented significant evolution from earlier operations. Rather than attempting to breach all obstacles simultaneously, engineers developed sequential detonation patterns that would systematically destroy the defensive complex in carefully timed phases. The initial Bangalore attacks targeted the forward obstacle zones, using charges calculated to create debris patterns that would facilitate subsequent operations. The explosive force not only cleared wire obstacles, but also created earthworks that provided cover for advancing troops and platforms for subsequent Bangalore assembly operations. This technique, known as progressive demolition, allowed American forces to advance through multiple obstacle zones while maintaining protection from defensive fire. The integration of Bangalore operations with close air support created devastating combined effects that Japanese defenders could not counter. Fighter bombers would strafe defensive positions during Bangalore assembly operations, suppressing defensive fire while simultaneously marking targets for demolition teams. The aircraft would then provide immediate close support as infantry exploited the gaps created by Bangalore detonations. The timing coordination required for such operations pushed American communication capabilities to new levels of sophistication. Radio networks connected Bangalore teams with supporting aircraft, artillery units, and assault companies, creating a synchronized offensive system that delivered overwhelming firepower within precisely coordinated timeframes. Japanese forces, lacking equivalent communication systems, could not respond effectively to such coordinated assaults. The Baguio operation also saw the first combat employment of experimental Bangalore variants designed specifically for Japanese defensive systems. These specialized charges incorporated shaped charge principles to concentrate explosive forces against targets,
Effects against specific obstacle types, while extended sections allowed breaching of defensive zones exceeding 300 feet in depth. The industrial innovation represented American adaptability applied to specific tactical challenges. Japanese attempts to counter the Baguio-Bangalore attacks revealed both the sophistication of their defensive thinking and the limitations of their material capabilities. Defensive positions incorporated blast deflection walls designed to channel explosive effects away from critical installations, while dummy obstacles were positioned to draw Bangalore attacks away from actual defensive barriers. These countermeasures proved ineffective against experienced American demolition teams. Reconnaissance techniques had evolved to identify genuine defensive obstacles through careful observation and intelligence analysis, while Bangalore employment patterns were varied to prevent predictable attack sequences. The integration of Bangalore attacks with diversionary operations further complicated Japanese defensive planning. The speed of the American advance following Bangalore employment exceeded all previous Pacific operations. Infantry units trained to exploit gaps immediately after detonation could advance several hundred yards into Japanese defensive positions before defensive fire could be reorganized. This rapid exploitation prevented Japanese forces from establishing new defensive lines and forced abandonment of carefully prepared positions. The capture of Japanese defensive plans during the Baguio operation provided detailed insight into enemy assessments of Bangalore effectiveness. Documents translated after the battle revealed that Japanese commanders recognized the devastating impact of American demolition techniques, but lacked the industrial capacity to develop effective countermeasures. The reports recommended avoiding static defensive positions in favor of mobile defense, acknowledging that fixed fortifications could not withstand systematic Bangalore assault. The employment of Bangalore torpedoes during the final Philippines operations represented the culmination of American demolition doctrine developed through 2 years of Pacific combat. The techniques employed demonstrated complete tactical integration of specialized demolition capabilities with conventional infantry assault methods. Japanese forces, despite their defensive sophistication, proved unable to develop effective counters to these evolved American tactics. The industrial analysis of Bangalore production during the Philippines campaign revealed the scale of American material commitment to specialized demolition capabilities. Production records indicate that over 150,000 Bangalore sections were manufactured specifically for Philippines operations, representing an investment in demolition equipment that exceeded the entire explosive production capacity of Japanese forces throughout the war. The logistics system supporting this production included specialized transportation and storage facilities designed to maintain Bangalore effectiveness under tropical conditions. Ammunition dumps incorporated climate control systems to prevent deterioration of explosive compounds, while transportation units included vehicles specifically modified for Bangalore transport. The systematic approach to demolition logistics demonstrated American organizational capabilities that Japanese forces could not match. The training system evolution during the Philippines campaign created Bangalore expertise throughout American forces rather than concentrating capability in specialist units. Infantry companies included soldiers trained in Bangalore assembly and employment, while engineer units developed rapid deployment techniques that allowed immediate response to tactical requirements. This distributed capability ensured that Bangalore effectiveness was not dependent on specialist availability.
Troops experiencing psychological effects of intensive demolition operations. Field hospitals developed triage procedures that prioritized Bangalore-related injuries, while evacuation systems included provisions for rapid treatment of blast injuries combined with conventional combat wounds. The aftermath of Bangalore employment during Philippines operations created long-term effects that extended beyond immediate tactical success. Japanese defensive doctrine throughout the Pacific underwent fundamental revision as commanders recognized the futility of static defensive positions against American demolition capabilities. The psychological impact on Japanese troops created morale problems that persisted through subsequent defensive operations. The intelligence value of captured Japanese assessments provided insight into enemy recognition of American tactical superiority. Documents consistently referenced the devastating effectiveness of American demolition techniques while recommending defensive strategies that acknowledged Japanese inability to counter Bangalore employment. These assessments influenced subsequent Japanese defensive planning throughout the Pacific theater. The technological innovation prompted by Bangalore employment included development of improved explosive compounds and delivery systems that enhanced effectiveness against sophisticated defensive obstacles. American industrial capacity allowed continuous improvement of demolition capabilities, while Japanese forces remained dependent on obsolescent defensive techniques that proved increasingly ineffective against evolved American tactics. The strategic implications of Bangalore effectiveness extended to the broader Pacific campaign as Japanese commanders recognized that static defensive positions offered no protection against American assault capabilities. This realization influenced Japanese strategic planning for subsequent operations, forcing adoption of mobile defensive strategies that sacrificed territorial control for unit preservation. The Battle of Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945, represented the ultimate test of American demolition capabilities against the most sophisticated Japanese defensive system ever constructed. General Mitsuru Uchijima had incorporated lessons from every previous American assault, creating defensive positions specifically designed to counter Bangalore torpedo employment while maximizing American casualties. The Shuri Line that protected the southern approaches to Okinawa incorporated obstacle systems that extended over 5 miles in depth, with multiple defensive zones connected by tunnels and communication trenches that allowed rapid reinforcement of threatened sectors. Japanese engineers had spent 6 months constructing these defenses, incorporating every innovation developed during 3 years of Pacific warfare. American planning for the Okinawa assault recognized that conventional Bangalore employment might prove insufficient against such sophisticated defenses. The solution involved developing new techniques that coordinated Bangalore attacks with other demolition systems, creating combined effects that could overcome even the most elaborate Japanese obstacles. The technique known as cascade demolition involved sequential Bangalore detonations designed to create progressive destruction of defensive zones. Initial charges would breach forward obstacles while creating debris patterns that facilitated subsequent demolition operations. Follow-up detonations would systematically destroy deeper defensive positions, creating corridors that extended completely through the Japanese defensive complex. The coordination required for cascade demolition operations pushed American tactical planning to new levels of complexity. Each Bangalore detonation required precise timing coordination with supporting fires, while sequential explosions demanded careful calculation to prevent interference between successive charges. The mathematical precision required for such operations
reflected the evolution of American military engineering from art to science. The industrial support for Okinawa-Bangalore operations included production of specialized charges designed specifically for cascade demolition. These devices incorporated variable timing mechanisms that allowed delayed detonation sequences, while enhanced explosive compounds provided greater destructive effect against reinforced obstacles. The industrial innovation demonstrated American adaptability applied to specific tactical challenges. The employment of Bangalore torpedoes during the Okinawa campaign achieved effects that exceeded all previous Pacific operations. The systematic destruction of Japanese defensive positions demonstrated that no static fortification could withstand concentrated American demolition assault, while the speed of exploitation following Bangalore employment prevented effective Japanese defensive response. Japanese casualties during Bangalore operations reflected both the physical and psychological effects of intensive demolition assault. Medical records captured after the battle indicated that many Japanese soldiers suffered psychological trauma from witnessing the destruction of positions they had believed impregnable, while others sustained unique injuries from the debris created by explosive detonations. The final assessment of Bangalore torpedo effectiveness during the Pacific War revealed that American demolition capabilities had fundamentally altered the nature of defensive warfare. Japanese forces, despite their engineering sophistication and defensive innovation, proved unable to develop effective countermeasures against systematic American demolition assault. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate tactical success to influence post-war military doctrine regarding the relationship between defensive fortification and demolition capabilities. The Bangalore torpedo had demonstrated that industrial production of specialized demolition equipment could overcome even the most sophisticated defensive engineering, shifting the balance of warfare toward offensive capabilities. The legacy of Bangalore employment in the Pacific established precedents for military engineering that influenced subsequent conflicts throughout the Cold War period. The integration of specialized demolition capabilities with conventional infantry assault methods became standard doctrine, while the industrial support systems developed for Bangalore operations provided models for military logistics in later conflicts. The human cost of Bangalore operations, while significantly lower than casualties from conventional assault methods, included unique psychological effects on both American and Japanese forces. The sudden destruction of elaborate defensive positions created trauma that extended beyond immediate combat effects, influencing veteran experiences throughout the post-war period. The technological innovation prompted by Bangalore development continued through subsequent military engineering evolution, with shaped charges and directed explosive devices representing direct descendants of World War II demolition techniques. The industrial capacity required for Bangalore production established precedents for specialized military manufacturing that influenced defense procurement through the modern era. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.